Hi, this is Maria, and I am part of the translation. Hi, this is Maria. I'm from the trans. Hello, this is Maria Sanchez. I'm from the Translation Techniques class, group 19. So I will discuss the key ideas for 2 chapters of Bolaño's book on translation. First, we will explore Eugene Nida's contribution to translation science, focusing on linguistic and cultural challenges. Then we will analyze how Lefebvre and Evan Sohar examine translation through cultural and literary frameworks. Okay, so in this first chapter number 4, Nidia categorizes communicative roles in translation, highlighting how translator transition between receiving and transmitting information. He stresses that successful translation depends on shared cognitive, cultural, and psychological factors. A key distinction he makes is between referential and emotive meaning. While referential meaning is dictionary based, emotive meaning varies culturally and emotionally. This complexity challenges translator who must balance literal accuracy with cultural relevance. Nida also introduces transformational grammar, suggesting that translation involves restructuring sentences into simpler kernel structures before adapting them to the target language. However, this remains debated in cognitive research. His concept of formal versus dynamic equivalence is crucial. Formal equivalence maintains structure and content but may sound unnatural. Dynamic equivalence prioritizes reader comprehension and engagement. Nida advocates for the latter, believing that translators should elicit the same response as the original text. Ultimately, he acknowledged that cultural differences pose challenges, emphasizing that translation is not just about words, but about conveying an equivalent experience. So for the second part, we're talking about the chapter 12, literary translation and cultural studies. Lefebvre and Evan focus on translation as a cultural act. Notes that translation often preserve cultural elements, as seen in the adoption of foreign foods. However, when translators believe their cultural is superior, they may not or may simplify or shorten text. Translation also plays a role in literacy conflict, where marginalized writers challenge dominant traditions. Lefebvre also introduces the cultural turn, arguing that translation is shaped by historical and political contexts. Patrons such as publishers and governments determine what gets translator influencing cultural narratives. Evan Evans' polysystem theory presents literature as a part of a larger, interconnected social system. He criticized static views of literature, emphasizing that translator influences literary hierarchies. In his center, periphery model, some texts gain prominence while others remain in the margins. Translation thus reshapes cultural landscape. So both Nida and the cultural theorists highlight that translation extends beyond words. It bridges cultures, ideologies, and literary traditions. Nida's dynamic equivalence helps ensure accessibility, while Lefebvre and Evans shows how translation reshapes literary and cultural norms. Understanding this perspective allows us to see translation as a powerful force in global communication. So that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.